Hey, good morning, everyone. It is I, Patrick Lovell, Truth Bomb riffing on Thursday, August 31st. Unfortunately, the end of summer. It's kind of a sad day. So sorry, my voice has got a little bit of a frog in it. August 31st, 2023 at 9:58 a.m. And when I say it is I, Patrick Lovell, I have to give a shout out to one of my favorite online personalities, an incredible musician and singer, a guy by the name of Justin Hawkins, who does this great podcast, Justin Hawkins Rides Again. So that's where that comes from. And I hope you don't mind, Justin, if you happen to tune in. It's out of a matter of respect and appreciation for your incredible talent and incredibly fantastic humor, like Justin Hawkins is ever going to see this. But anyway, I am Patrick Lovell, and I'm a muckraking journalist. I'm a fanatic. I'm a tenacious motherfucker, is what it comes down to. I'm a guy that made a 5-part television series that we're now providing for free. That I hope to one day somehow convince tens of millions of Americans that they've got to watch this goddamn series that we produced that lays out the entire blueprint for what we are, that everybody, and I mean everybody, needs to understand, but everybody in media and in power is some sort of amalgamation of getting it absolutely wrong, or in their intent is diabolical to craft maneuverings around the details of what it is that is not difficult. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. And just a quick glance at the front page of the New York Times, I think, is a perfect sort of reminder of what we're dealing with and what I'm trying to convey, inspire, connect to where we all come together in a way that it's like you trust me and that you believe in me and you understand who I am in the context of everything else that's going on. Because when you do, you'll be like, okay, the entire system is lying to me. The only dude who had the balls and the stamina and the wherewithal to go the distance, because it's just my DNA and it's what I do, is me, Patrick Lovell. And I hope that name uh, is more famous than Elon Musk, not because I desire fame and fortune. It's because I desire to get the truth over the madness of lies that has got everybody else by the balls. Because the most important thing to me is democracy and fairness and the liberty and justice for all, based on the integrity of law and holding power to account. Because I know nothing else matters, literally nothing else matters, if we don't have a society that functions the way it's designed. Because the way it's designed would enable the very best of us to come forward to move our country forward as it has throughout the past. Now, granted, the United States isn't perfect. You know why? Because people aren't perfect. Anybody, I find myself at this age, I'm 54 years old, okay? And it really pisses me off that I'm 54 years old. I don't want to be 54 years old. I'd like to be 34 years old with this knowledge, but I'm 54 years old with this knowledge, and I'm, battling, to try to get your attention, and I wish I was dancing on a pole or dropping a cliff or doing some stupid prank that gets your attention. I could somehow convey everything that I'm doing, but you know what? I don't do that at the age of 54. What I do is I do the work, the long form investigative journalism, which is what I grew up with, which enabled this country to understand truths that led to things like, I don't know, the civil rights movement, things like ultimately the anti-Vietnam War movement. And when you understand all of the elements of what the war in Vietnam was all about in context to what we are today, by the way, you get to, you understand that this whole thing has been a nonstop culture war of power between these sort of titans of how the system is run. And you have to understand, geopolitics. You understand history. You have to understand the law. You have to understand economics. You have to understand just an incredible array of information. And it took me this long to fully get it because I learned the right way. And so therefore I was able to ask questions. And it took me a long time to get to where I am, but it's only because of what I do that I was able to do it. I'm a producer. And in the end, that's what I want to be referred to as, the producer, because because it's just insane that I'm fighting for your attention. So I'll just give you some examples. I mean, look, for those of you, and I appreciate those of you who watch my truth bombs regularly, and I hope you'll like and subscribe and help grow the pie, and because that's how the algorithms work, and that's the only way we can get these truths out there. But please like, subscribe, and share. And for those of you who saw my last truth bomb that I recorded last Sunday, I went absolutely ballistic, and I just dropped a lot of, uh, vile language and things that I don't really want to do, but I did because I was just desperately trying to get your attention. And I'm going to do it slightly different today because I don't need to do that because I've already done it, I guess. But what it is that's important today that's different than yesterday? Well, just more of the same, but more reminders, revelations, validations that everything I'm telling you is exactly what it is. And I've got to pile drive this into your brain, just like the monstrosity of this ocean of lies pile drives into your head everything that validates what I'm saying, but just slightly tweaked to make sure that you don't understand how this works. I mean, just fancy yourself going back to your youth, right? Where, I don't know, maybe you're a younger sibling of a family where your two older cruel brothers are like hiding something from you, and they're up to no good, and they're playing you for a fool and a sucker, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's what's happening to all of us based on this stupidity of control, power, and quite frankly, corruption. And my entire game, my entire objective, everything that I'm all about is I want to crush corruption. I want to destroy corruption and defrag, drown, destroy the fascism that it fuels. And you'll understand more if you get through this, and everything else. So, like I always say, the first thing that you have to do to understand how what I'm telling you works is look at my work at www.thecon.tv. Now I say my kind of reflexively because my work was the amalgamation of a whole lot of people on our team to bring this incredible truth to you at great expense and incredible resources and very thoughtful, incredibly smart people, some much, much, much more intelligent than I am and much more capable than I am, but I just happen to know ask the right questions. I put it together and I produced it, and that's why I'm the producer, right? But I'm also the only one sticking his neck out at the end of the day, 2.5 years after we released, to be able to, never quit, because I know that what we've done is the most important story of the last 7 years. And I'll put it to you like this. I mean, a lot of people just look at Elon Musk, and I think he's looking more and more pathetic by the day, quite frankly. But they look at him because, in fact, I actually, put him at the top of the sort of people to look up to over the course of the last 13 years until I found out what he was all about because of X. But ultimately, Elon Musk is worth 260 billion, give or take many billions on a day based on the fluctuations in the market. And people look up to him just because he's profoundly rich, right? They're like, oh, okay, that's the richest guy in the world, so therefore I just accept him for what it is and I don't ask questions. That's pretty much most of America. In fact, young America, and, when he was on Joe Rogan and, smoking a spliff and, talking about, really existential questions, he's a fascinating guy and he's a brilliant guy, but apparently he's not the genius that made it all work in terms of Tesla and SpaceX. He's just a great guy who puts a lot of very, very intelligent people around him, and he was able to make deals, and he went the distance, and he was able to overcome a lot of the shorts and things that happen in the markets that, will destroy young companies, but he was able to overcome it. But it wasn't because of his genius. It was because, quite frankly, he had a lot of people on his team that wanted to make it happen, come hell or high water, most notably the United States government. Could Elon Musk have become Elon Musk without the United States government? Not a chance. So, in context, Elon Musk is worth 260 billion. I've got the $29 trillion truth. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. So that puts me monumentally above Elon Musk in terms of value. But you don't know that. And the reason you don't know that is because all of media has to suppress me. They have to asphyxiate me. They have to try to drown me. What they didn't know is that I'm not somebody you can turn off. I'm not somebody you can intimidate. I'm not somebody you put out, to pasture after you destroy his life. I double down, triple down, and I come back stronger, man. That's who Patrick Lovell is, because I'm the producer. And I never quit, especially when I've got the truth. Because when you've got the truth, you're bulletproof, and it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. So let's take a look at the front page of the New York Times today, and let's think about some of the headlines. The first thing that I saw this morning was that Clarence Thomas and Judge Alito finally admitted on their forms that they're taking fanciful trips with billionaires that is presumably unethical. I think it's illegal, but because nobody asks questions of the Supreme Court, because we all expect that the system was supposed to manage itself, and doesn't, as we've revealed over the course of the last, not we, but the system itself. I mean, thanks to the fantastic work of an incredible journalist by the name of Jesse Eisinger. He and ProPublica were the first to this story, and they did it like 2 years ago with the Koch brother backing, through Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas. Okay, so that was the first time that I heard about it. And by the way, Jesse Eisinger is in the con, if that should tell you something. And Jesse Eisinger did the amazing work in ProPublica as well to reveal all of the tax sort of policy and how it works to what ultimately during COVID helped, based on monetary policy, boost the value of the billionaires. So when the whole world shut down, even though it makes sense for Elon Musk and Amazon because everybody was ordering, but the bottom line is like Elon and Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos and I don't know, probably the Waltons and all of the top 10, top 20, top 30 billionaires in the country, their wealth went infinitely higher during a massive global shutdown. Okay, so how does that make sense? Well, everything that Patrick Lovell is revealing to you, which is the blueprint for how this whole thing works, okay? But, so the reason I bring up Clarence Thomas and Judge Alito and, the forums where they, reveal that they're corrupt, that they're working and taking trips and gifts and all sorts of who knows what's happening behind the scenes from, mega billionaires that want to be on the right side of these guys so that they make decisions on cases in front of the Supreme Court that skews to their model. Okay, that's called corruption. And that's in the Supreme Court. So the thing that's just right below that, and this is what's got me going, a mile a minute, I can't sleep. It's incredible. All of the things that have to run through my mind based on what I know. And you would do the same if you knew what I knew. But that's part and parcel of these truth bombs and the con. And also check out our podcast, The New Untouchables, on just do a Google search and it's with the real progressives. It's called The New Untouchables. You put those things together and Patrick Lovell truth bombs the con on YouTube, especially if you go to live and you see Deception Owns You. You put all of that together, you have literally hundreds of hours, if not maybe getting close to thousands of hours of information that reveals this whole thing. Coming from one source, the producer, Patrick Lovell. That's me. Do I sound cocky? Do I sound arrogant? Trust me, I've lost everything in the process. I should be worth literally tens of millions if this market made sense, but it doesn't because of everything that I'm revealing to you, which they have to shut me up and they can't do it. They're going to have to put me 6 feet under, and when they do, they're going to make me a martyr, but I don't care. I'm going the distance because that's who I am and that's what I do. Why do I do it? Well, let's take it down to the next story in the New York Times. Of course, Trump increased his assets by $2 billion. Yeah, that's what's happening in the New York AG's office. That's the one that I've been waiting for with the most anticipation because that's where our work reflects the most because that's where we're the ultimate experts. Because I was watching literally, and again, does that sound obnoxious? Does that sound like I am completely full of it, full of himself and, I don't know, cocky and that sort of thing? No, you've never heard of me. It's the whole system is making sure we're on the sidelines to not tell you this stuff because this is how the game of deception and obfuscation, which means hide the information, hide, what was the game? Hide the flag, right? Or the analogy of like when we were kids, and your older brothers are hiding something from you. That's analogous to that. So Donald Trump, why would he inflate his assets? Well, I've seen a whole potpourri on different shows, particularly in prime time, give their supposed credentials and debriefing on everything that's going on. And these presumed experts don't know what's going on. They should have watched the con. Or they should pay attention to the people that, I reveal in the con, which tells you exactly how it works, which is the story that they can't let you know, because if they did, then everything would unravel, which is what I'm going to do because I'm the producer, right? That's what the producer does. He unravels it come hell or high water because, again, to remind you, all I care about in this whole process is dignity, decency, and integrity of the law so that we can have upward mobility in the American dream. That's what drives me. What drives you? What drives me is the independence to become that which you envision for yourself. That's the journey of life. And you should have that freedom because that's presumably what the United States is. But no, it's not because of what I'm telling you. So why would Donald Trump hyperinflate his assets, where he overvalued his assets for $2 billion? Meanwhile, he's lying on his tax returns and saying that everything's a loss, which is another part of the story. But why would he do that? Well, yeah, it seems a little bit counterintuitive. It seems antithetical, but first and foremost, that makes him full of shit. That makes him a fucking liar. That makes him a snake oil salesman. That makes him Don the Con. And, so much more. But again, why would he hyperinflate his assets? Well, you get this streaming sort of like composite kind of, dip your toe in the water and, he did it for this and that. And it's kind of like this, but it's really not that. This is the kind of things that, these experts will, say on shows, hosted by a woman, for example, I saw on prime time last night, Stephanie Rule. Likeable enough woman, very nice, kind of cute, kind of fun, kind of the type of woman you'd like to meet at a bar, hang out with, and maybe go down to a quick trip to, the Bahamas and have a really great time. Honestly, that's how I think of Stephanie Rule. I hope that didn't sound a little sexist. I think that's exactly what she expresses in herself. But I'll tell you what I thought was really interesting last night was she also revealed that she used to be an executive at Deutsche Bank. Ah, that's interesting. Considering that CNN also hired Aaron Burnett, who used to work for Goldman Sachs. So two big financial behemoths are giving us, very attractive women that seem like they're professional because they're reading from a teleprompter and they're giving you the news. Might they be safe for the financial system? Let me give you another example. Like, for example, I think it was about 5 months ago, I happened to I was at the gym and I was on the treadmill and I couldn't believe this and I didn't have my headphones on and I started reading the teleprompter and I saw Aaron Burnett interview none other than Lloyd Blankfein, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, and she's asking him questions about fraud in the Silverbank, scenario, and all of the banks that went belly up, and also in FTX. I think they were talking about. That's right. They were talking about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, and Aaron Burnett is asking former CEO of Goldman Sachs, who was on top of the largest fraud syndicate in the world, to comment about other people doing fraud as if he's an expert of what to look for. He's an expert because he was the one doing it. And of course, Aaron Burnett either knew that or doesn't know that. But the point is she's not going to call him out on it because that's why she's in her position at CNN. Hey, what a great way to celebrate equity and feminism, to elevate somebody who's just a liar. Doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman or black or white or Jew or not. You're in that position because you're there to be safe to lie on behalf of the system. And that's Stephanie Rule too. And I'd say that to Stephanie Rule. And she's such a likable, nice person. But she's going through this situation last night. I was like trying to wrap her head around, well, why in the world would the Trump organization lie about their assets to hyperinflate other than, they put it on, yeah, he's just an egotist and, he's the kind of guy that would, do that just because of his ego, because he wants everybody to think he's worth more than he is. No, that's not why he did it. I mean, it's easy to see why he might be like that. I think that was the aftermath. No, there's an actual causality that the whole system is in the midst of. It's called control fraud. And by the way, we lay it out for you completely in www.thecon.tv. But in this particular case, in terms of this analogy, why do you hyperinflate the square footage of a penthouse and then you hyperinflate the asset value? Because you use that to get loans. And by the way, who was Donald Trump getting loans from? Oh yeah, Stephanie. Deutsche Bank! And I'd say the same thing to Russell Brand and to Matt Taibbi when they talk about there is no Russiagate. I'll just say to their face, Russiagate, you morons! Even though, of course, Matt Taibbi is no moron. He's the guy that knows everything, but he just found it, I think he got the message, if you want to know the truth. I think somebody went to Matt Taibbi and said, we got dirt on you in Moscow from your days of gonzo and being a little bit flamboyant with things that would maybe make your life difficult now. So why don't you just kick back and enjoy the algorithms and just be clickbait for, the likes of Elon Musk and the Twitter files. And then, of course, all things work against Russiagate and all things the establishment, and you'll be Trump or MAGA bait, and you'll make a whole lot more money. By his own declaration, Matt's making 5 times more than he did at at Rolling Stone for doing clickbait. And Matt Taibbi knows all this shit that I'm telling you. Except, you know what? It doesn't pay the bills as well, and it could get him in trouble. So why talk about it? Just a slightly different version than Stephanie Rule. Okay. So what is control fraud? Well, control fraud is based initially on modern executive compensation. When you understand that CEOs get paid on short-term profits, and their job is to take risks using other people's money to basically hyperinflate the stock of which they get bonuses from. Then if you follow it down the path, then you learn about how it all works with tax policy and ultimately why billionaires can make more money during a pandemic because of the way this loan apparatus works. But the more assets you have, with the more value they have, the more loans you can have. Now, if you're a CEO, are you going to make a shit ton of money by loaning to guys like Donald Trump? No, not necessarily. Some of the people in the mix that were the special client service reps, the people that Donald Trump worked with at Deutsche Bank, who incidentally were working with Putin as well. And that's why Donald Trump was getting the loans from Deutsche Bank, i.e. no Russiagate, right, Matt Taibbi? But they make a boatload of money on fees. But if you're a CEO like Jamie Dimon or Lloyd Blankfein or Solomon or Brian Moynihan, or you run down the list of the top financial behemoths in the United States, they make money on the sum total of what's out there in loans. Okay, so in the 2008, or in the ramp up to the 2008 great financial crisis, they wanted to expand the credit bubble, the credit box, to be able to get more and more loans in the system, of which they could put into this, let's just call it, the magic machine, that they were turning lead into gold in this alchemy of what we call liar's loans. But the incentive in what they use is what we call Gresham's dynamic, which it's all about the numbers. So when you have executives and brokers in the vertical of these huge financial institutions, they're not pegged to basically ask questions and do things by the book. They're told what number they're supposed to reach. And within Gresham's dynamic, and this is amazing work that was done by George Akerlof back in the savings and loan crisis, where he ended up with a Nobel laureate for this work. And by the way, George Akerlof is in the con, and his wife is Janet Yellen, our Treasury Secretary, who was the former chairman of the Federal Reserve. And these are the types of people that I work with, okay, that you don't know my name, right? But I can tell you that, for example, just as a quick segue, and this is all stream of consciousness and these truth bombs, so please bear with me. But, we ended up creating the con, which we got reviews that were like, this is the most important story of the last 70 years from places like The Guardian and others, and yet we couldn't get on Netflix or HBO. I'll remind you that HBO now has an infomercial of Donald Trump, which is literally the most pathetic example of how bad it's gotten at HBO Time Warner, because they're just looking for eyeballs and they could care less where they get it based on standards. For the last 30 years, there was a woman by the name of Nancy Abramoff, who inherited it from Sheila Evans. And man, did they do good work. They did fantastic work. But man, you cannot upset the apple cart and who's funding you and financing you. So we had a hard time getting in there. But now they're just, Nancy Abraham is gone, or Sheila Evans is gone. I think she's at MTV now, which is really a step down for Sheila Evans, considering everything she did at HBO. But I'm not sure if Nancy Abraham was the one who agreed to this Donald Trump infomercial, considering he is being investigated by the entire United States. And there was not one question in that documentary, with presumably a documentary on Donald Trump. It's just, it's basically bullshit for fucking eyeballs for HBO. So shame on you, HBO. And I'm glad I'm not affiliated with you, considering maybe you'll cleanse yourself and change your mind and get rid of Trump after tens of millions of people know what Patrick Lovell did. And I'll get more into that based on the complicity and the duplicity of celebrities and media and Hollywood and all the rest of it. But going back to my point about control fraud, so you've got the CEOs that widen the credit bubble to get more and more loans in the system, of which drives modern executive compensation, which their bonuses are predicated on more volume. So the more chumps you get in to get loans based on deceptive acts and practices, the more they're going to make in the short term. And that's how this whole thing is primed. And it's used through Gresham's dynamic, to where they use the number to manipulate, and everybody starts to lie, cheat, and deceit. on all of these apparatuses, which The Big Short, which is on Netflix right now, which was written by Adam McKay or adapted for a screenplay for Brad Pitt's Plan B. Both of those guys I love, as well as based on the book of Michael Lewis, which was a great book, but it still covers 1/10 of what the con does, but they ultimately get it wrong because they blame the wrong people for causing the crisis because they didn't understand control fraud, what I'm telling you, and the perversion of the incentives because all of the brokers were lying. I've got more evidence than I even have in the con that was on the shelf for season 2 of the con that would reveal that tens of thousands of liars loans were packed into the system by none other than the real Big Short, who was John Paulson, not Michael Burry. For comparison, Michael Burry and his team, which were showcased in Plan B, in the real story, they walked out with a $500 million upside for presumably doing their homework and getting it right and shorting the market, as opposed to going to the SEC and the FBI, which wouldn't have made a difference anyway, because the whole system was corrupt and everybody now knows it because that's what's in the con. But then also, John Paulson, who was this hedge fund with Paolo Pellegrini, handpicked all of these liar loans, and then they vectored it to Goldman Sachs. And when the entirety of the system blew up, well, guess who was there to pick up the mess to the tune of the biggest trade in the history of the world? John Paulson. $20 billion was his upside, his take in that cash. And by the way, I've got evidence that he was actually handpicking with Paolo Pellegrini the worst of the worst loans that they were loading into Greenpoint, which was the vertical for the mortgage operation that Goldman Sachs purchased, that they were then dumping on the whole world, that Supreme Court missed last summer in the case of the Arkansas Teacher Pensions Union versus the pipe fitters, steel pipe fitters and plumbers of Unions of America, working class. Right? And so now you've got guys like running for president, whether it's, Bobby Kennedy or Cornel West, and they're not telling you this stuff because they don't know this stuff. But going back again to Stephanie Ruhle and her guests and everybody that's going to be on Alex Wagner and everybody else, focusing on RICO and talking about RICO like they understand it's a crime syndicate, and Giuliani was the guy that took down the 5 mob bosses. Yeah, that's ironic as hell that he's Mr. Drunk Vampire guy now, pulling off the freaking RICO conspiracy in the elector fraud certification, which is insane. But where do you think the Donald got this information from? So Donald ran in addition to every other fraud scheme he did. So going back to Donald Trump briefly, Donald Trump, in the AG's office, I think there's 200 cases that's going to go over the course of, the last several decades. In fact, Donald Trump's attorneys are arguing statute of limitations. Hey, man, this stuff was yesteryear, so you can't go into detail about all the stuff that's going on. I don't know if that's going to win or play out or not, but of course, the legal profession, depending on who the spokespeople are and all these vectors, whether it's CNN or MSNBC or Fox, they're going to say, hey, look, this is the law, statute of limitations. Lawyers can argue either way. And when lawyers get squirrely and they become completely, jellyfish or worms or some sort of demented sort of 3-dimensional chess players for diabolical outcomes, which a lot of attorneys do because they get paid a lot of money to do that, by the way, then you pervert the entire profession. Because what's going on right now is that we're all asking this question. Well, the government has got to take down Donald Trump because it's so obvious that he defrauded the United States of America through a whole potpourri of incredible racketeering enterprises in terms of stealing the presidential election. That's one side of the house. The other side of the house is he was so over bloated and audacious because that's what punks like Donald Trump do because nobody ever takes him down. He starts to do things like taking top secret clearance information to sell on the market to his buddies, the Saudis, I'm presuming, because word has it that, Donald took down, military plans for what we would do to Iran in case of a nuclear sort of conflict. And I think he sold that information possibly to the Saudis. Because why would the Saudis give Jared Kushner and Steve Mnuchin $6 billion since, Trump left office while Trump's taking the heat, while those guys are getting backdoored billions of dollars for Saudi, which I'll remind you was deeply, deeply, deeply involved with 9/11, which is a whole nother part of this whole frickin' racket. This is all a continuation of literally 40 years, let alone the last 20, but the last 5 on overdrive. And meanwhile, the American people are getting dumber and dumber and dumber because mainstream media is filled with fucking idiots that are paid to lie and deceive you and hide the fucking flag. And going back to control fraud, so when the CEOs expand the credit circle, they create more and more opportunity to fuse loans of which they're getting paid fees by the whole time because in the run-up of the 2008 great financial crisis, there was $70 trillion of liquidity looking for a place to park its capital, and the biggest, most safe aspect of that on the planet was American housing. But what was going on, which were liars' loans based on these deceptive acts and practices, getting people loans that didn't qualify for loans, or setting other people up who had their house in liquidity to get them into new loans based on all sorts of deceptive acts and practices where they were tweaking money, and yeah, people got paid money and they got loans and everything else, but based on things they didn't understand, which is called deceptive acts and practices, and by the way, are against all sorts of civil rights violations, most notably what's known as the Home Equity Ownership Protection Act, which the Federal Reserve is supposed to frickin' manage. And by the way, I've got evidence that former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan had all of the information that we show you in the con and then some when his colleague at the FOMC, Ned Gramlich, the head of the Philadelphia Federal Reserve, gave him all of the information of the liar's loans that I'm revealing to you that he ignored when he was mandated by Congress to regulate the Homeowner Equity Protection Act, and he had physical evidence from the top investigators in the country, who, by the way, are in our podcast at the New Untouchables, and they told us the story about how he knew, and he was supposed to immediately shut down the low interest and also the capitalization and all of the other sort of things that go into the housing market, because the housing market at that time was about a $4 trillion apparatus, and we're talking 2004, 5, 6. But the derivatives on all of these liars' loans reached something like 600 to 800 trillion in 2008. By the way, the derivatives market now is over $1.4 quadrillion, and I could come back and try to ascertain some of what makes that what it is. But in this particular case, it was all predicated on liars' loans. And so if you happen to see The Big Short and you saw that, there was this woman at the credit rating agency who was blind, and, what's his name? I can't remember his name, but he was playing the character of oh God, Steve Carell. Steve Carell played him, right? But I can't remember what his name was. Anyways, part of the hedge fund that was getting the information from Deutsche Bank that was saying the whole thing's going to blow. It's all full of shit. And they showed, what the credit risks were based on AA, AAA, this and that, but what they were actually doing, what they all shorted and that sort of thing. And, in the scene with the woman from the credit rating agency, they weren't doing their job. They weren't actually looking at what was constituting the securities and the trust that they were selling on the open market, which is what they were paid to do, because they're the ones who had to rubber stamp that these loans were AAA, because otherwise they couldn't sell it to other countries and they couldn't sell it to pensions, which they did all over the country and they blew up the world with. Going back to my Supreme Court decision that they got wrong last week because of the corruption in the Supreme Court that I opened up with Judge Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are under the thumb of the media right now because they're corrupt to their freaking gills, right? And then ultimately, if you want to know the truth, it's really funny. Michael Burry just recently shorted the market on the puts, option puts, for $1.6 billion. This is the guy that the whole Big Short is predicated on. By the way, it turns out that Warren Buffett apparently did a similar thing to the tune of about $6 to $8 billion. Oh yeah, by the way, Warren Buffett is one of his companies. He owns Moody's. Yeah, they're the ones who were the lady in The Big Short with the sunglasses on that were rubber stamping the loans because they were told to. Because the entire system was based on control fraud, because you make more money for the CEOs and the boards, and that's what our whole system is all about. Post-deregulation, desupervision, and deregulation, that the Clinton administration basically put the nail in the coffin of Glass-Steagall in 1998. It was all a process. It's a process that we lay out in the con. It's the process that we show you in all of our work, particularly the work that I've done on my own, because I'm the producer that will never stop on this, but it's playing out over and over and over, and now it's just a complete mirror. Donald Trump is a complete mirror and reflection of everything that we have, but the entirety of media is telling you that the government is demonstrating that Donald Trump defrauded the United States using racketeering, and here's all of the things he did to do it. But what Donald Trump is being accused of doing to the government and the people of the United States, Wall Street did to the world. And so who's being held accountable? Do you think I'm saying that Donald Trump shouldn't be held accountable because I'm telling you that Wall Street got away with it? Of course not. Donald Trump is first base. A blind prosecutor who is the first year could look at this evidence on Braille and get a conviction. If we have juries with a bunch of MAGAs and they blow this whole thing, which I could see happening because what happens when you lie to the American people? The American people become stupid and chaos ensues. And we've always had this under sort of the cover behind the scenes, like the church has pedophiles as their priests. Well, we've always had white supremacists, behind the scenes ever since we've had slavery in this country, for generations. And then, after the Civil War, we maintained it with, the basically perversion of sharecropping, which is a very similar situation to what subprime lending is all about. It's all a setup. But you had Jim Crow, of course, and then you had the civil rights movement after the Civil War. I mean, this has been a constant battle in the United States. So the United States at this stage of the game in 2023, if we look at the long arc of justice, does it bend towards justice? No, it's bending corruption right now because everybody on top of the system is getting paid by it. How are they getting paid by it? Whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it's Congress. Oh, by the way, and I will say I did see this in the front page of the New York Times today too, and I think it bears us thinking about it. Mitch McConnell, I don't know how old Mitch McConnell is. Mitch McConnell has been the kingpin of this corruption for decades, working on behalf of all of the bad actors that exist, whether it's corporate America, whether it's the Chinese and his wife's involvement, and who else. And I know Russians, by the way, with Mitch McConnell as well. Mitch McConnell is like basically standing in front of the cameras and going silent and paralyzed as if he's like some sort of zombie or some sort of robot or some sort of weird thing. And Dianne Feinstein did the same thing. They're both just old people that do not need to be in Congress wielding the power that they do because they don't even know what the hell's going on. And they're literally demonstrating that right in front of our face, let alone being able to absorb what I'm trying to tell you. And the craziest thing about that, it's like nobody's asking questions, and it reminded me of Charlton Heston when he gave that speech, for the NRA, I don't know, 20 plus years ago, especially. I think it was the time when Michael Moore made, Columbine, the documentary on Columbine, where he gave that speech, that fiery speech where he's like, not from my cold, dead hands. And he was talking about changing, the Second Amendment, based on the liberty of people to own firearms and that sort of thing, given everything that subject matter gives us over the course of the last 30 years. But, Mitch McConnell and Dianne Feinstein and others, I mean, they're literally not by my cold dead hands am I going to give up power, which is enabling all of this corruption like crazy. The Supreme Court is corrupt to the gills. I could give you so many details about that would make your head spin from people much smarter than I. Same with Congress, same because of all the stuff with Citizens United. But more importantly, the stuff that I do know as well as anybody in the country, because I was taught by the best and my education was basically in a $4.5 million budget to get the $29 trillion truth that I'll remind you is worth exponentially more than fat boy Elon Musk. And, what I'm trying to do is I've got to get through to you to make you understand that the whole system is a canard, it's smoke and mirrors, it's this and that. And everybody knows it because everybody says, oh yeah, the system is rigged. Everybody knows it, but they don't know the details. Not even the guys running for the presidency, especially Cornel West. Cornel West talks about, oh yeah, systemic racism, this and that. He hasn't even know. And I've talked to Cornel personally, direct, and I'm trying to urge him to understand this information because of what we lay out in the con, which ultimately reveals that an African-American woman who had to commit suicide because they were going to throw her out of her house that she owned, that was being stolen with her from fake documents that the sheriffs didn't understand. Ultimately, she chose to shoot herself in the chest 5 times instead of go homeless because the American jury murdered her. And by the way, we were represented, my team, the film, we were represented by Paradigm, by the same agent that represented Ava DuVernay. Fantastic filmmaker. Couldn't get Ava DuVernay to come on as an executive producer, which would have meant, by extension, Oprah Winfrey. So Oprah Winfrey, who, everybody's favorite, sell a book and, she's all this and that throughout the last 30, 40 years, everybody's favorite on David Letterman back in the day, right? But she became really the ultimate vector for Barack Obama to get elected, and she stays quiet on this. What we reveal is 50% of African-American, 55% of African-American household wealth evaporated because of what I'm telling you. Didn't matter if you were an elderly widow living on a fixed income or if you were a doctor or some sort of professional inside the Beltway. If you're African American, you got targeted by a financial system and they set you up to fail and they stole your property using all of this stuff that Donald Trump did to the United States government that they're going to throw him in jail for. But meanwhile, what we did to Wall Street with all these CEOs that got away with the control fraud that I'm laying out for you, because it creates 3 sure things. what you're going to do in the short term is you're going to increase the volume, which is going to increase the profit that makes everybody rich. And then the last thing that's guaranteed is the whole thing's going to fail. It's short term, man, because we don't have aligned interest in the outcome, and it's not capitalism, and I'll tell you why. Even though it's capital that makes all of this stuff happen, everybody gets paid by it. So yeah, sure, it's capitalism, but capitalism is the nature of risk reward. You invest based on doing your due diligence in companies that are going to sustain themselves with great operational procedures that work within the law that give long-term profits. And that's why somebody who is knowledgeable is going to spend their extra income on growing in things where we have trust in them, like Apple or whatever else, given whatever, Apple's offshoring, deception's all about and all of that, but they still make a product that everybody buys. And if you would have invested in Apple back in the 80s, you would have made a pretty penny on your investment. That's the notion or the nature of capitalism if it's honest. But when it's dishonest, it's built on this perverted machine of deception, which are deceptive acts and practices based on racketeering, because everybody's in on it. And so in our story, The Con, we found the only RICO conviction in the country that proves this entire calamity. But what's more insane, and what I did in my podcast, that was insane in its own right. I mean, think about the percentages that we found the only RICO conviction that the entirety of this system covered up. And to put it into perspective for you, the sum total of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is the regulator for the nation's bank, or the FBI or the SEC or the DOJ and others that are involved, I mean, they operate to the tune of about $90 billion a year in their budget, and they also have tens of thousands of employees to prevent what it is that happened. And then they're supposed to hold accountable when they do find out the facts, what happened, which they didn't do, which we don't have the law. And this happened during Barack Obama's administration with Eric Holder, who pulled a smoke and mirrors duck dive and betrayed who they are. Because why wouldn't you? When you get a taste of the good life, and you've got your house in Nantucket and your corner office at Covington and Burling and you're guaranteed $30 million a year payout, hey, you can look past the fact that somebody like Addie Polk shot herself in the chest 5 times as her house was being stolen while the goddamn Federal Reserve was supposed to regulate that because they had the information, but they didn't. And instead, they backdoored $30 fucking trillion to the goddamn bastards of betrayal and deception, which is our financial system. And oh yeah, by the way, that was all manufactured by formerly Chairman Alan Greenspan, whose wife Andrea Mitchell is on MSNBC, which is another joke. And the bottom line is she was, interviewing just recently this guy, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's this 30-year-old punk who's talking about truth. This guy doesn't know shit. And he's out there, I'm going to do this and that and that and this. And I guarantee he's working for the same guys that are putting money in the back pockets of Clarence Thomas, okay? Again, corruption. And, to finish this thing off, going back to the Federal Reserve, what I revealed to you and what nobody else has or will and hasn't, and nobody will ever do this, I'm the only guy in the country that's got this information, that's willing to give it to you, that has to penetrate tens of millions of Americans, because you need to understand this when you all say that the system is corrupt. People, we gave tens of trillions of dollars to billionaires through socialism over the course of the last 13 years. How's the last 13 years been working out for you? I'm sure many of you, stole what you could get your hands on during the PPP loan fracas during COVID and whatever, because there's so many freaking liars, cheaters, and deceiters in our country. And most of them, I think, end up being MAGA. That's why they love Don the Con, because they're all in the same business of freaking fraud. And fraud, by the way, isn't shenanigans like Hillary Clinton said, because she was backpocketing $400,000 from Goldman Sachs, who was the biggest player in this business at the time, and had to make way for none other than the biggest player now, BlackRock, who got put into position by Timothy Geithner when he described that we're going to make the American people foam on the runway for the crashing financial system. And he put BlackRock, who were with Blackstone, one of the major vectors of mortgage-backed securities. And oh yeah, by the way, Larry Fink was the guy that cleaned up the, through the Resolution Trust, what happened in the aftermath of the savings and loan crisis, which my mentor got 30,000 criminal referrals and 1,000 convictions of high-level white-collar executives, most notably
the CEO of the largest bankruptcy at the time, a guy who, was this church-going guy who hated pornography, but then was raping and pillaging elderly, widows throughout the country. And he was the CEO of Lincoln Continental, of which none other than Alan Greenspan came out of. He was his chief executive, economist, and that's how he got the job at the Federal Reserve and brought all of this upon us. In fact, Keating is his name, who was the CEO of Lincoln Continental. He said publicly, "We've got to kill Bill Black dead." Bill Black is the guy who taught me. Again, 30,000 criminal referrals, which used to be a process through the FBI and the DOJ and all the collective agencies, particularly our regulatory agencies, starting with then the Office of Thrift Supervision and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which all stood down because it was a race to the bottom and they just let this fraud get away with it because the CEOs did, and it was all a fucking facade. And when it blew up, it was all racketeering. The con shows you A plus B plus C equals E. All the way down the line, and then some. And by the way, all of these liars loans that we're seeing through the elector fraud certification, with the RICO conviction with Fonnie Willis going after Giuliani and the 18 defendants, and first of all, where do you think Donald Trump learned? I don't think Donald Trump was the brainchild of anything that took place during the January 6th insurrection, but for one thing that he offered. He probably told Giuliani, "Look, man, when I had Trump home loans, right after, I got busted with, the Trump University, where the only time I ever got nailed was, predation, and I paid $25 million to make it go away." But he had Trump mortgages, and he learned in the industry, he was late to the game. He wasn't a big vector, but he learned that everybody was creating liar's loans from documentation fabrication. They were changing the numbers on how to get the bank, the loans approved, and that's how they got paid their commission. Who's they? We're talking about the brokers, the bottom feeders in this whole thing. And then the underwriters were paid to basically have blindfolds on their face to approve loans that the lenders wanted to get the highest volume out of, which we called high yield spread premium, because there was $70 trillion sloshing around that they were basically fueling everybody to lie, that then got put into trust with thousands and thousands of these homes that then went to our rating agencies that none other than the likes of Warren Buffett owned at Moody's to do what they show you in The Big Short. But they all give you little tiny pieces, and nobody gives you the full story. And I'm giving you the full story because what does it ultimately wind up being? Well, as it turns out, in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, we had tens of millions of illegal documentations going into illegal foreclosures. So millions of people, and I don't care what you think about most of the people that got, a lot of people that got foreclosed, I don't want to say most by any means because it wasn't most, but a lot of people that got swept up into foreclosures were asshole idiots speculating, taking advantage of getting way more homes than that they could afford, kind of like what The Big Short blamed everything on, which were, in The Big Short, it was strip dancers, right, that fancied themselves experts in finance because they had a whole bunch of revenue streams and that they were trying to parlay it over and over. Meanwhile, they didn't know they were being set up in these loans to fail, and they didn't understand the value of the asset and how the appraisers were hyper inflating it, just like Donald Trump is getting nailed for with the AG's office in Manhattan. Why? Because that's how you loan against it to get the high yield spread premium. So everything that Donald Trump, again, is doing is just a fraction, but a reflection and a refraction of everything the system did. And again, I want you to remember what Donald Trump did. I think I saw a senator a couple of weeks ago, this is part and parcel to defrauding the United States, because when Donald Trump said through these fake elector schemes using documentation fraud to try to steal the election in the Electoral College, they were basically lying about the Dominion voting booths and others. And of course, we saw Fox just get nailed for $787 million because Rupert Murdoch admitted that Fox is a liar program, and everybody that comes with it, especially Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham and then Sean Hannity. And Sean Hannity, by the way, I've got evidence that he's involved with these liar loans rackets and predation in places like Atlanta, and that's a whole nother story. Everybody's in on it, yeah, including Nancy Pelosi and her husband in real estate in San Francisco, yeah. But she's out of the picture now, so I guess we don't have to focus on her as much, right? Even though she got away with it for 30 years. Ever wonder how she went from $240,000 as Speaker of the House or something like that? But I think their family is worth net, I don't know, a couple of $100 million. Yeah, it's really good to be close to the source of power, especially if you're close to the source of the ultimate power, which is the Federal Reserve. Which, incidentally, the Federal Reserve, I told you that we gave them, this is the most important part. This is the most crucial part. Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which is the lender of last resort capacity for the United States through our central bank, which is supposed to be used in times of emergency or other things, acts of God that you can't see to keep the nation afloat. Because we're a fiat currency, there's a lot that goes into it. What they did was, because of the smoke and mirrors, the powers that be, particularly from the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, and he ended up getting a Nobel laureate himself for this fraud. And then Hank Paulson, who's the former CEO of Goldman Sachs turned Secretary Treasury under Bush, who facilitated this whole thing, especially when he told the world that he was using, the bazooka to be able to, instill confidence in the markets. And then ultimately, of course, none other than everybody's favorite freaking loser, Timothy Geithner, who was the former director of the New York Fed, that failed completely to regulate everything that I'm telling you about, and then he fell upward to become Obama's Treasury Secretary. Obama came in and rode this wave of change we could believe in, and then he betrayed the country by putting everybody that created this problem in power to clean it up, because Obama wasn't in charge, really. He was just a face, right? He was like, hey, I believe it's not the red state of America, it's not the blue state of America, it's the United States of America. And Barry, Mr. Cool, could shoot 3-pointers, and drain them. And, he's like, what, the American dream, from a white family who worked in the military, in the munitions factories during World War II, and he comes up through Harvard. Look, I love Barry. I thought Barry was the man until I found out that Barry was just a freaking figurehead to make sure that we all believed that the American dream was going to be resurrected. Instead, it turned into a nightmare because he betrayed us with his boy, Eric Holder, to the first black president, the first black AG of this country, who betrayed black Americans. And trust me, I'm not saying that from the perspective of I don't think black people should be at the highest apparatuses of power, just the opposite. My God, my biggest heroes for the most part, from Jimi Hendrix to Earl Campbell to, I could go on and on and on. Black people, Muhammad Ali. There is so much glory in some of the African-American struggle that I've bared witness to my whole life, that are some of the greatest human beings in the world. So never in a million years would I have thought that somebody like President Barack Obama, and by the way, I knew where he came from in Hawaii because I've been there many times and have many of the friends that went to his school in Punahou, I think it's called. But, a lot of cool guys, probably smoked dope back in the day while he was playing basketball, not too far from my generation and that sort of thing. Never in a million years would I have thought Obama would be, part and parcel to this whole thing. But he was. And now he and Melania and everybody else in the clan, they're on Martha's Vineyard. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Again, like Nancy Pelosi. As the president of the United States, you get paid for, a lot, and you don't have to ever want for anything the rest of your life. But you know what? It's nice to be super rich, right? So Obama covers for Wall Street, puts all the main players back in charge of cleaning up the mess that they created. Larry Summers and I'm thinking of all the president's working group that came out, of the Clinton administration, that basically all put this under the rug to where they gave $30 trillion. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. $30 trillion to the bankrupted financial system that got there through racketeering and all of these deceptive acts and practices that the government is now demonstrating that Donald Trump is guilty of. But, in this case, when you get so big, too big to fail, hey man, don't worry about anything. Let me hook up you with a bonus and we'll all just be mom's the word. And Jamie Dimon, by the way, for all of you Trumpers and your MAGAs out there that were going nuts over, the nature of, international, sex trafficking and the disgust you have for Epstein and everything else. Meanwhile, where do those massage therapists come from? They came from Mar-a-Lago, okay? And oh yeah, by the way, as it turns out, Chase, Mr. Jamie Dimon, that, this is where the ultimate irony is. It's pathetic that most of us with any intelligence and concept of what's right and wrong know that Donald Trump is the biggest freaking maggot of all time because he is a criminal right in front of our face and he's got to go away to save the democracy, right? But meanwhile, the New York Times celebrates Jamie Dimon as the guy who is the guy that, gives us credibility in the financial system. Meanwhile, among everything else that we show you in the con, and I'll just say this, $13 billion settlement through Elaine Fleischman and everything to cover up what we're talking about. But ultimately, he's America's, banker. He's the guy with all the cards because they weren't going to go down. Well, that's because the Federal Reserve and the government can't let them go down, and he's the face on it. Oh, yeah, and by the way, for the last, 15 years, it turns out that Chase provided $4.6 billion in action for Jeffrey Epstein. And they just, paid $250 million to the victims of Epstein Island. And how many of you guys know that? You MAGAs that really hate sex trafficking. And I think there's got to be something weird with that with you, like you're projecting. Like Ted Cruz that looks like he's some sort of like freak that goes to a, adult store, dressed up as a guy with a trench coat. That's what he looks like every day to me. You guys are creeps. Creepy. You're weird. You're freaking weird. Not to mention you follow all these things about lies and Trump and everything else. You're worthless. But for everybody else, your boy Patrick here, the producer, has the full truth that could basically purge corruption and the fascism that fuels if only millions of you join me. And so this is my pitch to you. Look, I'm a producer. None of this stuff, if you want to do it professionally and get it out there to the world and be able to defeat this madness of money, and again, I'm going to remind you that billionaires spend billions to loot trillions. That's what's going on, because the socialism of this whole thing is that not only does the government, the Federal Reserve through monetary policy provide 0% interest, which is free money to the primary dealer brokers who use the smoke and mirrors to basically prop up assets, to basically buy a bunch of stuff, to securitize, to sell back to the Federal Reserve, who buys it through quantitative easing. That's a nice little trick, and then they sell it on the open market to bonds. The government doesn't have to do this to finance itself. It only does this to basically placate the oligarchs all around the world for control. Hence, why would Jamie Dimon be involved with Epstein Island? It's called military intelligence. What am I talking about? It's more like Mossad and CIA, and they want to leverage people so that they can blackmail and powerful people, because they always had world leaders, and they had, the most important people in the United States, including scientists, that they took down to get the massages and whatever else, so they could have information of them. It's the oldest trick in the book. All of these smart people, they were too busy studying back in the day to hook up with a lot of ladies, so they're pretty vulnerable to be able to take the bait when they got a lot to lose. That's what Epstein was, and that's what Jamie Dimon was involved with. And oh yeah, by the way, a lot of that money was coming from overseas that we backstopped and guaranteed with the full faith and credit of the United States on the death of the likes of Addie Polk. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to end that. I'm trying to crush the corruption, because they're now fueling the fascism. These billionaires that are these white supremacist guys from, the likes of the Mercers and the Koch brothers, they've been doing this forever. Think of it going back to like Jim Birch Society all the way through today. And it's like, what we're seeing on X is literally Cambridge Analytica 3.0, where they're just hate vectors. There's so much hate and fraud. I mean, you see anti-Semitism trending, okay? That's all part and parcel to this. So ultimately, what I'm asking you to consider is that I've got to create an ongoing podcast that's going to bring this information against all the lies and deception of media that continue to pull the rug on you every single day. They don't know what's going on. Remember what I said about Stephanie Rule and Aaron Burnett? They feature the guys that are the villains that are ultimately trying to tell you something that they're involved with. Get it? And that's actual fucking fallacy. It's ridiculous how this game works. It's just high school. People, it's like who's popular and what do you know and what do you not know, and it's just sick. And that's not what I think it means to be an American. Like I said at the outset, I believe in dynamism. I believe in liberty and truth and justice, and I believe in the free market, and I believe that everybody should get to where they go. But I actually also believe in a safety net, and I'm somewhere between Teddy Roosevelt and trust busting through the progressive movement to FDR and the New Deal. That's why everything I'm doing is creating the clean New Deal. But ultimately, we've got to be able to fund this because, A, we're not going to be taken seriously by anybody unless we've got millions of people that are kicking in, because suddenly that's when the machine's going to be like, oh, they're a threat, and they're going to wise up, and they're going to try to take me down. But by that time, it's too late, because I've been laying out this truth forever, and they have done everything, and it's BlackRock, in my opinion, has been able to suffocate and asphyxiate the truth of the con. And the only reason we're out there is because my former partner, who I don't even talk to anymore, I think he got the message. He just decided that we were never going to make any money in the real market on this, because the market is controlled by BlackRock now, who actually managed the emergency stimulus that I told you about, because they wanted to get Goldman out of the way, because Goldman had too much heat on him because of everything they did during the 2008 financial crisis. So they put Larry Fink in there, and BlackRock BlackRock now owns the world. They're the largest asset manager in the world, including Netflix and HBO and everything else, that all of these acquisition execs have smothered me. So that's why I've got to go to you, the people, to reveal what the likes of Oprah Winfrey and Obama and everybody in the system doesn't want you to know, that people like Addie Polk had to kill themselves when they had their houses stolen because it was the rape and pillage of the American dream, that we put tens of trillions of dollars that happened to trickle down in the pockets of the likes of Eric Holder. Okay, that's one side of the equation. And so what I'm asking you to consider is that I need to hire the editors. I want to get the guys involved that are going to go after it, to be able to get the algos involved, and we're going to bring you this truth in a very professional way, where we've got to build millions of eyeballs on this thing, and I'm asking you to contribute $13. Now, if you go to the con and you watch the con at www.thecon.tv, just know that budget was $4.5 million that we're giving to you for free. My partner, and I feel horrible about this because there's no value for truth in the market, he just wiped his hands of it, but what a great guy to be able to make it available to the public, which I'm trying to tell you is the answers to everything, but yet there's more. So let's do the math on this. Because of $4.5 million, if 357,000 of you kicked in $13, you'd match what we already did. But that's nowhere close to the tens of thousands of hours that we all put into this to get it right with the right guys and everything else. The value is nowhere close, but what we got was the $29 trillion truth, that the $90 billion a year of and added up, $90 billion over the course of the last 13 years is what? That's what we were able to achieve. It's a miracle, but it's a nightmare because they destroyed my life. They destroyed my life. They suffocated me, but at the same time, I got to keep swinging because I'm beyond royally pissed because I've got the access to the truth. And I just, thank God I'm a loud guy that never gives up, because that comes in handy to when you got to fight the biggest conspiracy in the history of the world, especially if I got the balls for truth and justice, which I do. And I know tens of millions of you do out there. Are you going to sit and let MAGA take over through this whole jocularity of fucking fraud and criminality? No, you're going to join me and we're going to kick their ass. That's how we're going to do this. And so if 350,000 of you kicked in, honestly, then we'd have enough budget to really, really go big on this. But what my end game is, in addition to what I'm telling you, I've got to create a Lollapalooza-like barnstorming event that's like me being Bob Geldof from the Live Aid era, where we got everybody involved and then we changed the world. That's the idea, because I've got to get these truths to the American people and meet them where they are. I got to take this on a traveling roadshow because I've got hundreds of hours on the shelf. I've got thousands of pieces of evidence. I got access to everybody who's on the right side of this, and we need to plow this into the American people's head. And I want to get millions of people from sea to shining sea, starting in the Northwest, like I did in my film Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, all the way through the country. And we wind up with this barnstorming tour with this incredible momentum of tens of millions of people turning off their televisions, not listening to the lies, and then finally getting hit with the truth. And then that we wind up in Washington, D.C. underneath the gaze of Abraham Lincoln, who said over 150 years ago, a nation upborn by the people shall not perish from this earth. That's who Patrick Lovell is, and I know that there's millions of you out there like that. This is a civil rights movement. It's got to be peaceful, but it's got to be smart, and it's got to be angry, and we got to be equipped with the truth, and the truth has got to elevate over the madness of noise, lies, and deception, and it's exodus from corruption, and it's the resurrection of the American dream. Why? Because we're smarter than this. All we're doing is we're letting the powers that be, that literally inherited what the previous generations created in terms of technology for the oil fossil fuel paradigm and the international sort of syndicate, if you will, that's premised on the dollar being the global reserve currency predicated on the commodity of oil. That's really the gold standard, is oil, to be honest with you. But that's a problem and a conundrum in a world that we're choking and poisoning the oceans and then destroying the dynamism, the livability, the ability for all life to function. It's the end of the road, man. It is Armageddon. It's all of that and then some. You're looking for the second coming? I don't walk on water. I'm not promising you a ticket to heaven, but I am telling you this. The truth, when you've got the truth, you're bulletproof. So I hope that's a long enough, thorough, who knows who's going to listen to this. Please like and subscribe. Please share. Please come on board. Please call me. Please reach out to me. Please connect with me. God damn, there's got to be a way to overcome this absolute insanity. Rise, roar, revolt. Failure is not an option. Onwards and upwards.